Thanks for having me. I know having somebody from Villanova in your home, or I guess I'm from St. Joe's, is risky. I do have a brother-in-law and an uncle who graduated here, so maybe that gives me a pass. And I know I won't out them, but there are some people who graduated from St. Joe's undergrad here in the room. And I also want to add, you guys getting fair trade status helped us to get fair trade university status. I helped with our campaign, and when I met with our president, I created this memo that we shared with cabinet, and one of the reasons I said that we should get it is because Villanova has done it. And I just wanted to kind of jab at them and kind of push them, and he quickly responded, well, what are the other Jesuit universities doing? In order, as if this didn't matter, but this clearly mattered. So I thank you guys for being leaders in that area. I've got 10, 12 minutes, so I'm going to move fairly quick. I'm going to play with an idea in consumer culture. And I'm going to use two quotes from relatively famous social scientists to play with this juxtaposition in how power and fair trade operates. The first is one that probably most of us in this room have heard. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Within fair trade, the people at the center of the movement fit this characterization. These are business owners, purchasers for places like Whole Foods, students who led campaigns to get fair trade university status, people like Joe Chesa in Philadelphia who now roast for Philly Fair Trade roasters. But with consumer-dependent social movements, oh, I need this, don't I? With consumer-dependent social movements like fair trade that are relying on people who may not be greatly invested in the movement itself, buying a fair trade object is a small act. And Howard Zinn, in a moment of optimism, writes, small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. Well, to me, as a sociologist, that's an empirical question. You know, buying something that's fair trade, does that really matter? So I mean, does it matter as you an individual? Do you care? And so I went out and did some research to try and explore this issue. I wanted to see, do small acts matter? So in order to kind of answer that, well, that was a question that arose that I found interesting starting my project. I'll explain what I did really quickly. I did ethnographic work at fair trade coffee shops and 10,000 villages in the city. I traveled to Nicaragua. I met with leaders of the fair trade movement. And I also met with everyday consumers who said they liked to shop at fair trade places, but often, you know, would go to Walmart without telling anybody because they viewed Walmart as the evil empire. So they sneakily went there when they had to go. They would tell me things like. So I want to present two small findings, and then I'll play with a riddle. One is that the people who are characterized by Margaret Mead's quote, the people at the center of the movement, they often got there because they had an emotionally intense experience traveling to a developing country and seeing the living conditions of people, say in Nicaragua, in Bangladesh, in India. Many of these people traveled as part of their job. So if you worked at 10,000 villages, they will send managers over to live with people who make the products they buy. Equal Exchange does the same. And these types of experiences are powerful, and it leads people to come home and they would say things like, I stopped going to the mall, I boycotted Walmart, I refused to buy Nikes if that was something that they cared about. And they lessened the number of contradictions in their purchasing patterns. And what I mean by that is, you know, you might say you hate Walmart, but if you go there occasionally, there's a contradiction. So how do you make sense of that? These people who traveled to places like Nicaragua, they had less contradictions than the great majority of people who support fair trade. The second kind of puzzle I played with in this project is if you go into a 10,000 villages or a fair trade coffee shop, you'll see advertisements that say things like, you know, with each product you buy, we can put one more tortilla on our family's plates, right? In other words, they're saying there's a moral imperative for you to buy, right? you should buy this way because it's the right thing to do. This type of language is common in fair trade coffee shops. You'll even see it in Starbucks. Whether they're actually socially responsible or not is another question. But you want this feeling, right? So this feeling is presented through advertisements. But what I found was consumers, they'll do anything possible to move away from that type of rhetoric, right? They don't want to sound too preachy. And so in other words, instead of saying you should buy this coffee because you can help this coffee farmer transform his or her life, they'll say things like, you should buy this coffee because it tastes great, or you should buy this coffee, it's fair trade and it's the same price as another type of coffee. Or if you're at 10,000 Villages, those customers will say things like, you know, all right, fine, so maybe it helps somebody out, but it really matches the couch in my living room, right? So in other words, instead of the threat of sounding like they're proselytizing or trying to convert you to fair trade, they'll say you should buy this because it looks good, it tastes good, it's priced competitively. Anything to avoid these sounding too preachy. Let me give a quick overview. Fair trade coffee is still the fastest growing segment of the specialty coffee market. But what I argue in this book is that the growth of fair trade coffee is largely due to entrepreneurs, buyers, student groups. It's not really due to simply consumer demand. Consumers care, right? But if it's not fair trade, and it's especially something like coffee, they're going to go there anyway. If it's convenient, if it's close to their house, they're rarely going to pass one shop to go to another shop. If they're buying it at a supermarket, that's a different story, right? If there's fair trade option there, they will pick it out. But I'm arguing that the growth of this movement is due to the people in the center. So it's the coffee shop owner who's thinking, maybe fair trade, maybe something else. And then by making that decision, they're having a huge impact on people on the ground, on farmers. Just to give you an example. Handicrafts has not enjoyed a rapid growth the way coffee and much produce is receiving more and more fair trade certification. But handicrafts does do something better than much of the food that's certified as fair trade. They tell great stories. So if you've ever been to a 10,000 Villages, almost every product has a little narrative that's attached with it, and customers routinely say they love this. Now, they won't throw the narrative in, if they're giving it for a gift, into somebody's face. They're not going to say, you know, you got to buy this because you're saving this worker. Instead, they just make sure it's slipped in with the gift, and it's something kind of like covert. But the narrative is important because it creates meaning. It's a way to attach kind of a value, a moral premium to an object that otherwise is the same as any other product. So 10,000 Villages is doing this exceptionally well, and that's one of the organizations that I did look at. One limitation of shopping for a cause, and I'm using fair trade to get at the bigger issue of what does it mean to be an ethical consumer, is that shopping is often not very meaningful, right? You can buy something and say there's research coming out of marketing departments about willful ignorance. So say you care greatly about buying sustainable wood, and you find a piece of furniture that you love. If you really love that furniture, most consumers will, even consumers who care about finding sustainably harvested wood, will not ask about it, right, if they think it's not going to be sustainable. So this process of willful ignorance, because we purchase so many things on an everyday basis, we'd have to ask every question constantly, is this sustainable, is this ethical? And even consumers who care deeply about fair trade often don't do this. So this is a question as fair trade moves into mainstream markets like Walmart and McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts, how do we create meaning in places like this? It's a tough question for leaders of fair trade who want to create an attachment between consumers and their brand or their product. Even though small acts may not be meaningful, they do present a way for us to, let me come back to that, that'll be a positive. Small acts are influenced by real and perceived market forces. So the Great Recession, during the Great Recession, the stock price of Walmart went up. Because one reason is because the stigma on shopping at Walmart that many highly educated, largely middle and upper middle class consumers have was lessened, right? Because times were tight on so many families, unemployment increased so much, it wasn't as acceptable to look down on people for shopping at Walmart. Just as an aside, the same people who look down at shopping at Walmart think Target's okay, but don't ask about Target's, labor policies or anything like that because they don't want to know. So this is a limitation, right? As the economy goes downhill, is there enough meaning in things like fair trade coffee to keep people coming to buy it time after time when their finances are tight? So whereas I'm critical of the ability of shopping to be that moment where people shift and create deep meaning in something like fair trade, for people who do care about it, I know some of you were probably here because you maybe were required for a course, and other of you care a little bit or a lot about fair trade. Shopping for fair trade presents that moment where you can reconfirm to yourself that you're part of this community, right? It's not a major moment in your life, right? Buying a piece of fair trade coffee, but it can be this little moment where you say, okay, I'm part of something bigger. And as part of something bigger, I'm seeing that, for instance, over $100 million have gone back to coffee farmers just from purchases in the US in the last 10, 12 years. So you're part of that, right? And that can be really invigorating. This is a debate in the field, right? In the field of ethical consumption, some people are saying, I can buy my fair trade coffee and that gives me license to not give to charity or not buy anything else ethical, for the next couple days because I did my part. And other people say, and I'm more in this camp, this is part of, we know that, right? We're critical of our own consumption patterns, and buying ethically or buying fair trade is just, it's one way of confirming this identity of a person we maybe want to become. The activists will all say, fair trade can change people's lives, and you look at the advertisements and you see the smiling coffee farmer and you just say, aren't I such a great person because I changed Juan Carlos's life. Even though I'll never meet him, I'm just a great person because of it. And it's overstating the cause, right? I mean, fair trade is not lifting people out of poverty, but it is, and if you look at the research on this, it is making a difference in people's lives. Kids are staying in school longer, education benefits are health benefits are real and tangible, and farmers are making a little bit of an economic premium on these sales. So whereas it's not lifting people out of poverty, it is making a difference. So to conclude, my research looks at storytelling, and storytelling matters, right? Having a good story about the stuff we buy is a way to attract consumers to this movement. And the hard part is finding a story that resonates with people who don't know what life is like in Bangladesh or Nicaragua, and that's a challenge the movement's going to continue to face. I don't have the optimism of fair trade. Just one purchase will change the world. At the same time, I think this way of thinking can be inspiring, and fair trade can be part of bigger movements for social change. And I think the great majority of people who are running the fair trade movement feel the same way. They're not so naive to think this one purchase matters, but they do believe that collectively fair trade is a better way of shopping. And although I'm not a fair trade activist, I have helped with fair trade campaigns, and I do buy into the notion that it is a better way to consume. So when Villanova makes a decision to become a fair trade university, this is meaningful. This is really a difference maker in the global economy. If we're targeting individuals, I'm more critical. I don't know if us as individuals make a huge difference, but again, collectively, what you guys have done here is inspiring. So thanks for having me. I'll let the other speakers come and answer questions at the end.
Yeah, okay. Do that. So again, Gwendolyn Tedechi. I'm from the Department of Economics at Manhattan College. Chris kind of ended by I'm like, I'm through this. It's been a long day. Keith ended by talking about storytelling. And so I'm going to kind of use this time to talk about my own story with fair trade. If you don't know, economists don't like fair trade. And so I'm not supposed to. But I'm also a development economist. And so I kind of care. And so therefore, it was kind of a journey. I had a student, not a student, a colleague of mine, we were just talking, and she's like, what do you know about this fair trade stuff? I've got students who are pushing this fair trade coffee in our little coffee shop on campus. What's behind it? And she knew I came from kind of the development side, and so we started talking, and years later, we did actually publish a paper that talked about fair trade. And so this was, that was a very long process, but, kind of figuring out, picking apart what's going on here. I'm trained as a classical economist. I know about free trade, and so we'll come back to that. Now, on the other side, Manhattan College had a bunch of very interested students. The campus ministry and social action was selling Dean's Beans coffees labeled as Jasper Java, or the Manhattan College Jaspers. So the Jasper Java, the chocolate they were selling, there was a Just Peace group that kind of took on fair trade as one of their things. And I came in to Manhattan College in 2008, and there was kind of this collision. And I started talking to people in campus ministry and started talking to students. And then there was also this kind of fair trade colleges and universities piece that was bubbling up. And that's kind of where the collision happened and where it really kind of changed me, and I became an activist. I really don't like activists, but I started becoming an activist for fair trade. So now the standards, okay, and here's more I'm the economist, what am I supposed to think? And so for those of you who have had some econ, hopefully you'll understand a little bit of this. One of the big things, particularly with coffee and some of the agricultural goods, is that there's a minimum price. Well, the other part is there's this social premium, okay? They get this money to send their kids to school or build a health clinic or other such things. And, these are like two big, wonderful things that fair trade does. Now, the economist in me said, wait a minute, that's a price floor. Price floors are bad. They cause deadweight losses, and ignore that if you don't know what it means. But they're not efficient. And then this idea of a social premium, wait a minute, that's a subsidy. Subsidies are bad, okay? And subsidies cause deadweight losses. And economists just kind of said, 1, 2, no, okay? The first, there were two major papers that came out right as fair trade was kind of becoming big. And it was like, bad, inefficient, don't do it. And then it was quiet, because the book had been closed. But there's something there, okay? And so I kept digging. Is there something wrong with the model? Okay. The model that they were using relied heavily on perfect competition. And something that I've realized with our undergraduate econ classes is that we will say, we're going to assume this, and then we ignore it, and we see what the answers are. But the problem is, if the assumptions aren't right, you can't really use the outcome effectively. And so that's where it was like, wait a minute. Is fair trade coffee the same thing as traditional coffee? Perfect competition assumes identical products. We may not have identical products here if a consumer sees that fair trade coffee as something more than just coffee. Are growers all alike? Okay, perfect competition assumes that you have lots of sellers that are all pretty much the same. No, you've got some really big growers in Colombia, Brazil, that dominate the market, and then you've got all these little smallholders spread throughout the rest of the world. And that's usually the ones that the fair trade advocates were going after. Okay, things have changed a little bit since then, but small growers were the big part. And then what about other markets? Okay, do markets in developing economies work well? No, okay. There are problems in credit markets, which I know from my microfinance work, and that's kind of how we got onto this paper. fair trade does help provide credit to farmers as well, in between when they actually, have to start growing stuff and paying for inputs until when they actually get paid for their product. So there is kind of a credit fix that's put in there. Transportation issues, interlinked markets, which is something almost never gets taught in undergraduate work, but you've got people who are doing both, buying somebody's coffee and providing credit. And so when they're providing two goods, this usually puts them in a somewhat different position. So the assumption of perfect competition is not really a great one. And so if we can't really trust that, we can't really trust the outcomes of those models and what they said initially. Now that said, it's not perfect, okay? But there are other things, okay? So even if you want to say, fine, the traditional model works, a big part of it is the positive externalities that come along with fair trade. And so externalities, for those who have not had an econ course, externalities are the uncompensated impact of one person or firm's actions on the well-being of a bystander. I do something that helps you, okay? You're not paying me for it. You're not even asking me to do it, but I come and I give this great lecture because I like to talk about fair trade, and you guys learn a little something, okay? So there are these positive externalities. And with fair trade, there are a whole bunch of different things that help out. Environmentally sustainable. Fair trade often helps the farmers become organic, and so you have an improvement and an expansion in organic production. Fair trade coffee is more likely shade grown, which is better for the environment, fewer pesticides, and bird friendly, because if you're growing under the forest canopy, you're also protecting wildlife. So there's all these extra benefits there. Poverty reduction, okay, is a positive externality. We don't like to see poor people. I live in Harlem, okay? When I have to walk along with my 5-year-old and he's like, Mommy, why is that guy sleeping on the street? Okay, we don't like poverty. And so knowing, that's the Economist in me. That's just, I'll just tell it how it is. We don't like poverty, but it's there. And so if this is something I can do, now granted, Chris just told you what I do doesn't matter, but I feel like it does. I feel like I can be one of those little points that does something. A reduction in child and slave labor. If you know the story of chocolate and the dark side of chocolate, you may have heard about the child and slave labor that's involved in cocoa production. And honestly, after watching that movie, I could not eat anything other than fair trade chocolate for like at least a year. I mean, like, I refused. I went out and had to find fair trade chocolate chips just so I could make cookies in my household. The reduction in illicit crops. This one's a little far-fetched, okay? But if they're not growing coffee in the Andes, what else are they growing? And so you may have, I mean, there were farmers abandoning their coffee trees because the prices were so low that they didn't, I mean, it wasn't worthwhile to them to go pick the cherries, okay? I mean, prices were so low, they were abandoning their farms, okay? And if they're gonna abandon the coffee crop, they might as well do something that's profitable, not quite legal, but profitable. And so there are all these other things that you have to think about. And I like thinking about them. And so, now we're a fair trade college. We have been for almost 2 years, and we are a Catholic college, a Lasallian Catholic college. And so we have this kind of respect for the poor, this concern, the social justice aspect that has always been there. And so, again, we have, you know, the coffee, the chocolate, the Altagracia, but it hasn't been easy. I mean, it's one thing to declare. You get that hurdle, but you got to keep it going. One thing that I've found is that getting into the academics has helped strengthen what we do. We've had MBA students do a case study. We've had, you know, we have people speak in different courses. Yes, we have events like this that are not specifically curricular, but there's also the possibility of, I mean, true academic learning associated with fair trade. I mean, obviously you have 2 academics here who've published in it, so it's a real field. Okay, it's not just something you do for fun on the side because you're in college and that's what you do. Since then, we've had some major expansion. Our food service, they've been great. They have a whole spread of equal exchange in our mini mart, which has been wonderful. We've also had our challenges. Our Follett bookstore just got taken over. Instead, we have Barnes & Noble. And literally, our fair trade intern went in there and asked about fair trade. We don't sell that brand. So we have a lot of education to do with our new people. And that's one of the things. I mean, you've got to keep continually educating individuals. And we also have our partnership with CRS and a global, CRS Global Campus. Because we have, the connection with the ambassadors, with the, instruction, with the institution as a whole. And so our president was very supportive and was like, of course we would do this. We had it easy, okay? I didn't have to point to another college and say, well, they did it, why can't we? But it really just fit in with the mission, which made sense. Now, just some parting thoughts. Educating new students. You guys have this problem where you leave. Okay, we get you all educated, excited about fair trade, and then you go. And so just making sure that you continue to get those young people in there. If you haven't thought about it, for those who are still around, making sure that, or trying to hit them even in orientation. Okay, get them early, get them in. Getting faculty involved, okay, is also a nice idea, because then they talk about it. And then people start to see it as something that's not just a student club, it's something else that's real. And I found that speaking well, at least I tell people, speak their language, okay? Don't just go in there and say, poverty is awful, trade is awful, this is, trade is the reason why we have all this. No, okay, they're just gonna look at you and say, yeah, whatever. They may not give you the hand, but they will think that, smile nicely, and then just ignore it. Speak their language, show them a paper, show them a book, say, have you seen this? What do you think about this? So speak to them in their language, and maybe they'll listen. Maybe, not always. There are some who are never gonna listen, but it is what it is. And the strong steering committee, and it sounds like you guys have that here, and I'm really proud of what you guys have done. So that is me. Okay.
Thanks. So at Whole Foods Market, we are a grocery store. So we're in the business to sell groceries, but we're more than a grocery store. We want to be conscious and aware of what we're doing. It's really important to us how we impact the world. And we love fair trade, and we sell a number of fair trade items in our stores. But we also saw some limitations with fair trade, and we actually developed our own program called Whole Trade. And Whole Trade has a few less restrictions than fair trade. You don't have to be a member of a co-op to be part of it. And we recognized that we were making money from many third world countries around the world, and that the conditions that the people who were helping us make that money were not good. Their living conditions were not good, and we wanted to do something that would improve their lives. So by paying them better wages, by giving back 10% of the money that we made to them to improve their communities, and by giving them a really strong outlet for their products, because we are a company of growth. We have a commitment to try to triple this number of stores in America and around the world as soon as possible. That's our commitment. And in fact, we are really desperate for leaders in our company. I mean, that's what right now is inhibiting our growth a lot. And Whole Foods Market is a great company to go to for a career. And if you care about what's happening in the world, you can have a real opportunity to make a difference working there. So another thing that Whole Trade does is 1% of the Whole Trade dollars goes to Whole Planet Foundation, and that's another That's a nonprofit foundation that we founded about 13 years ago now, and what that is set up to provide microloans in third world countries. We're in 62 different countries, including America, where we've given, we are providing microloans now. And if any of you are familiar with the Grameen Bank and Muhammad Yunus, we partnered with him to develop Whole Planet Foundation, and that's something that we really feel is very important to make a difference in people's lives in places where there is extreme poverty. So Whole Foods Market does these amazing things. You know, every February and March, we all do fundraising for Whole Planet Foundation. We're part of the Mid-Atlantic region. We raised over $1 million for Whole Planet Foundation this past spring, or just last month. And as a company, we raised over $6 million for Whole Planet Foundation. And that money goes to microloans. Whole Foods Market covers 100% of the administrative costs. So none of the money that's raised goes to administrative costs. 100% of it goes to microloans. And of course, an average of 97% of the loans are paid back. And that money just goes back out again. And often loan recipients will take another loan because they've accomplished one thing, but there's more to do, and then that enables them. And the average loan is $167. $167 can make a huge difference in someone's life in a third world country. So, we're really proud of the things that we do. At Whole Foods Market, there's so much more to us than just a grocery store, and that's why I can, have worked there for 19 years, because I'm continually impressed with the change and growth that our company does. Like on a regular basis, we're always trying to get better and improve and think about how we're doing things, what we're doing, and how we can make the world a better place. And we do that many, many things in our stores. One of the things that we don't think about, we think that food should be cheap in this country. We think cheap food is good. We shouldn't have to spend much money on food. It's not something we think is important. We'll spend a lot of money on a car, but we don't want to spend much money on our food. And I think that's a mistake. And I think that we need to all start thinking differently about our food. And fair trade and whole trade are wonderful things, but it doesn't really cover everything that we eat, because that's mostly things that are, a lot of them are tropical. It's coffee, it's chocolate. We can't really sustain ourselves on whole trade or fair trade items. There's certainly things that are important in our everyday lives, but thinking about where the story behind all of the food that you eat, I think, is really an important thing. And that's something that Whole Foods does, and we really want to tell the story. We really want to educate our customers, and it's really important to us to give back to our communities. And it's amazing that every store has someone like me, and my job is to do community outreach. I have a donation budget every month. I get to make donations to the community. 4 times a year, I get to hold a 5% day where we donate, several $1,000s. We donate 5% of our store sales. That's usually, for our store, it's $4,000. That's a really great thing to be able to do. And Whole Foods Market is all about, on so many levels. We care about the environment. We didn't talk about flowers too much today, but flowers, we sell whole trade flowers at Whole Foods Market. And if you start learning the story behind how flowers are grown and the working conditions of the workers who are growing those flowers for us so we can have those beautiful roses at Valentine's Day and those cheap bouquets that you might see somewhere, it's very disturbing. And whole trade flowers give you that peace of mind that you know that the workers were treated well, that they were paid a fair wage, that their working conditions were not detrimental to their health, and that they're using good, sound environmental practices. So there's just so much that Whole Foods has to offer, and I know that we have a reputation of whole paycheck. And I think that if you ever want to learn how to shop smart at our store, that's definitely something that I'm always willing to help. You know, I have a brochure about it. I can take you on a mini tour. You know, you don't have to spend your whole paycheck to shop responsibly, to eat healthy, and to support living wages for everyone. And another great thing about Whole Foods Market is we pay living wages to our employees too. And supermarkets can be an unpleasant place to work. At Whole Foods Market, 70% of our workers are full-time. That's usually the opposite in the supermarket industry. So there's a lot of things that we do that you don't necessarily see. We're not the best at bragging about what we do, but all of these things are so important to us. So, and whole trade is just part of what we do, but it's the right thing to do. And I do have a brochure about whole trade that I hope you will come and get. And then I also have a brochure about the Whole Planet Foundation. And I know you were saying how Thousand Villages sends their managers to work at the places where they're getting their things. Well, we send our team members. We send team members every year to different countries around the world where we're doing the microloans, where we're getting our woven black baskets from Africa, you know, where the coffee's being grown, where we're getting our whole trade bananas. We have a partnership with Earth University, and that's where a lot of our bananas are grown. And we're really excited to see, like, now we can get organic whole trade bananas. We couldn't do that for a while. So things are getting better and better. There's more and more that's available, and we're very, very excited about that. So I think that's about all I have to say. So thank you.
My wife and I belong to a CSA, so we know the farmer. And I was just reflecting on your comment about relationship and getting to know the people. And so I guess my question is, or have you studied CSAs at all in the context? I know it's not fair trade, but in the context of the relationship building with the producer.
Yeah, I haven't, but somebody in my area has, a marketing professor at Wisconsin, Craig Thompson, and he argues that CSAs came back. Well, CSAs are kind of invigorated now because I'm blending his argument with one of my own, but the loss of family-owned farming, the growth of mass production within farming and manufacturing means we don't know farmers, we don't know the people who make the stuff we buy anymore. And his argument is that has led to a pushback, an increased demand for things like CSAs or buy local and ways that you can reconnect with farmers. Am I
Right,
answering your?
well, it's much more meaningful to purchase your food when you know the person that grew it.
Yeah.
Right, and it's the same thing with free-range chicken or beef or pork. If you can go to the farm where the animals are being raised, the rancher, you know what I mean? It's much more meaningful than going into Whole Foods, no offense, and buying meat that you have no idea. You don't know the person that produced it. It might be free-range, but you don't know the person. So I think that's really important with getting the ethical consumption thing.
I very much agree. In sociology, we frame that under authenticity, and there's a lot of work looking at how people are trying to get real connections with real people in an age of mass media and an age of everything's mechanically produced. So CSAs fit that really nicely, and it's an emotional experience. It's you meet them face to face, and you create meaning in a way that's you said it better than I can say.
Well, I mean, at Whole Foods Market, I'll just respond a little bit, but we, many of our stores are CSA pickups. Many of our stores hold farmers markets. We don't charge the farmers anything. They just are allowed to come in and have access to our customers. And we have many relationships with local farmers and provide them with an outlet to sell their produce. And if you look in our stores, you'll see producer profiles throughout the store, because we try to make that connection. I've had farmers come into our store, and so customers can meet them, and we think that's really important, and we love CSAs and farmers markets. We support our community farmers markets, and we think that's really important. I was a member of a CSA for many years. I think it's a wonderful thing to do.
Shout out to Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, the new Whole Foods in Brooklyn has a rooftop garden where they grow all
farm.
the things.
Yeah.
It's a farm on the rooftop.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the only one in the country.
I think it is.
How do you balance this idea of connecting with the farmers with what you were talking about earlier with not being too preachy? Like, what have you found in your research in terms of the language of connecting with the farmer but not preaching? Where's that balance?
I don't know. I mean, there's research on college students, activists, working class people who are all showing that, there's no survey research showing this, but ethnographic research showing people in these different contexts are hesitant to express their moral identities. And you think that's supposed to be the opposite of college students, right? You're supposed to, I'm gonna change the world, this is how. But this research is suggesting, this is outside what I do, saying that even college students are really hesitant to put that out there right now, which is weird in the context where our political leaders are constantly going at it. In fair trade, I just see that people try and convert others in a more subtle way. So I don't know how to extend this to CSAs, other than people in the natural foods movement, maybe you both can speak to this, talk about, they'll promote things by saying it's healthy or natural before saying it's fair trade or socially responsible or good for workers.
I mean, I know from the fair trade organizing that I've done, it's really a matter of knowing your audience. I mean, I said, speak to the faculty in their own language, but at Manhattan, I mean, I love Lois dearly, but she's our campus ministry and social action person. She's been an organizer in the Bronx her entire life, and she hits you over the head with it. And it's, well, you can't buy that chocolate. There's there's slave labor in there. And it's you just see people kind of cringing. You can't talk to the provost, who is a finance guy, that way. So you have to tailor it. You have people who like the buy local movement. Well, you say, you know what? Do you know any local farmers of pineapples? I don't. And so you can kind of say buy local if it's an option. If it's not, think fair trade. You've got union people, okay? And I mean, again, economists are supposed to hate unions, but union wages put me through college, so I'm not complaining. But if you're talking to union people, you talk about the safety aspects in it. So I think it's really, if you're trying to promote, you promote with the right message. And some people don't necessarily think about it that way or read it that way, or they don't know all the different stories you could possibly tell.
I think at Whole Foods, we're a little preachy. And I think we get probably more customers than normal that are preachy also and like it. And I think that, we don't sell anything but whole trade bananas. You don't have an option. You buy a banana at Whole Foods, it's whole trade. You don't have an option. Same, with our pineapples. So we're not necessarily giving you the choice sometimes.
Do you find that the research about the aversion to preachiness or rhetoric, do you find that's only restricting it to food, or because you think of a company such as Tom's, which has a platform that we give away a pair of shoes for everyone, which is kind of what you're talking about, but it seems to work for them. Is this aversion to preachiness, is that really restricted to food, or?
Not at all.
Right, not
I
at
mean,
all.
I know specifically with handicrafts, that there was this, you'd put, it's a fair trade sale, and people were like, oh, okay, there's crappy stuff from X, Y, or Z. But, and speaking with Jackie DiCarlo, who was the previous PJ, that it was really, the producers there are just not used to more modern practices where everything looks the same. Or in a catalog, if you see a picture, the consumer wants that picture, not something that's slightly different. And so it's, I don't know if that's quite getting at it, but you almost had to hide the fact that it was fair trade to get people to buy it. And you need to overcome these things. The same thing with fair trade wine.
That's what Dunkin' Donuts does. All their espresso drinks are fair trade, every single one.
But they don't tell you that.
They don't tell you that because they're afraid their consumers will view it as pretentious and snobby. So they don't, there's a little sign on most Dunkin' Donuts as you walk in, and it may say that, but you won't find it anywhere else.
But you've got to find the balance of preachy and profit.
Yeah.
So, just in general, speaking about the advancement of fair trade in general, this is probably more directed at you, Dr. Brown. Is it, we have Manhattan College, and St. Joe's and Villanova represented. Is there a stronger tie between religious affiliation and the whole ethical consumption than there is between, like, colleges being generally more progressive and liberal thinking places compared to America in general? Is it stronger between religiously affiliated colleges than it is between standard public colleges?
You might be able to
The
better answer that.
majority of declared fair trade colleges and universities are Catholic affiliated in some way. At least out of the first 5, I want to say it was 3 of 5. But since then, a lot of it has been the Catholic ones. The Jesuits have been more reluctant for some reason. They were the last, but you had Siena, and they're Franciscan, we're Lasallian, I don't know what you guys are, but Augustinian. Okay, you've had a lot of the other orders kind of going in, but they've been trying to break into Jesuit circles.
For us, it was our vice president of mission and identity bought into this, thought it was the right thing to do, and he made it happen. And it was, the students wanted to use the mission statement to have the university live up to its goals. So religion mattered.
Yeah, just going off of that, like what we're going to talk about in a few minutes is the fair trade t-shirts. And like for our day of service that, we have over 4,000 t-shirts that go out. And right now, we don't think they're fair trade or, different organizations. I'm not just like day of service, but that's a big one. But, and my fair trade group has been like, we're a Catholic university and we're wearing shirts that are probably made in really bad conditions, so I think it's a nice jumping off point with the religious. But there are some non-religiously affiliated schools, and hopefully that will, keep being it. Most college students are very progressive and, interested in social justice, so, yeah.
I'm just wondering each of your different perspectives. You're kind of talking about this a little bit before, but like the organic, local, natural movements have all kind of gained a lot of momentum lately. But it seems like fair trade maybe isn't always attached to those things, even though I think it could be. I'm just wondering why you think that is, and if it has something to do with the demographic of people that typically buy fair trade, or like you were saying, Dunkin' Donuts wants to veer away from that, or promoting that that's what they're doing. So I'm just wondering why you think that is.
I think fair trade's modeled the organic movement. Organic started as pretentious, highly educated consumers only buying it at cooperatives and places like this, and now it's mainstream, right? The government sets the certification label, and fair trade sales are still increasing rapidly. So there are signs that it's following a very similar trajectory, and the consumers do overlap. They're different. But the fair trade people I was interviewing, they were constantly talking about organic this and that. So I think there's a big overlap. Fair trade's behind organic in terms of market awareness. 1 out of 3 Americans knows what fair trade is right now. But if you push them, Gwendolyn says it seems high. If you push them, they won't have very much knowledge.
We found that on campus too, and that's like one thing that we're trying to work on. We did the same thing. People know we're Fair Trade University, but like, okay, well, what does that mean?
Right.
Why is that so great?
a quick question. I work for in the Department of Dining Services, so there are limited amounts of products that are even fairly traded, and then there are products that are fair trade certified, and products that are fairly traded. And we deal with one company that claims they're beyond fair trade because they pay even higher prices in the fair trade market, but they don't necessarily want to pay for certification. So there's different issues, and I don't know if everybody really understands that or puts a value on that, but I was just curious what your opinions were.
It sounds very much like organic was at the beginning too, where there was a lot of flux about the certifications. The biggest thing I have is how transparent is it? You know, I don't want to call you out because you're right here, but you know, does someone look over and see that you're paying others? You know, are they willing to open their books and show that they're paying more than fair trade? And that's really more this, I mean, from my perspective. As long as there's more money going to the farmers, that's what I care about. Who cares about, I mean, the labeling thing will figure itself out eventually, but until then, you know, how transparent is the company is kind of where I am.
Yeah, and we do have certifier partners that verify that we are meeting 4 key criteria to have the whole trade guarantee, which is quality, premium price to the producer, better wages and working conditions, and care for the environment. So we do.
I think you're hitting a huge issue, and it's a bigger issue in the United States than in other places. It's like a certification revolution of all these little logos. I mean, the One Village coffee shop over coffee there has at least 4 logos. So what do they all mean? And I do have an issue with things like whole trade and cafe practices because I don't know. And in the United States, we've got all these different logos, and they're competing to say who's really fair. And in the UK, they have less of this problem. There's more unity in the trust in the logos. And it's not to say that whole trade isn't impressive, because I suspect it is. But I, as a consumer, I'm hesitant when a company certifies their own product and says it's fair. Like, I thought that was what was cool about fair trade, and outside organizations said what you're doing is just. Again, not to demean what whole trade is, because I had a student once, this is kind of funny, we were talking about fair trade, I was teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, and we're talking about Nicaragua as if I knew something. And this student's like, actually, my family owns more land in Nicaragua than anybody else. We're the biggest coffee exporters in the country. And it was crazy, right? So this student talks to me, and he tells me all about what it takes to sell to Starbucks. And their cafe practices, which is like their in-house fair trade certification, although I'm critical of it, it does make a big difference for these for farmers. Could it be better? Sure, but everything could be. So that's my way of saying, like, I respect what whole trade is, but I just don't know enough, and I'm skeptical.
Well, fair trade actually is one of our partner certifiers.
Right. But I see there's Rainforest certification there too.
The Rainforest Alliance.
And
Fair Trade International, Fair Trade USA, and Institute for Marketing, Social and Fair Trade Certification. So those are our partners.
But like, it's certified is another one, and that's really more production. I mean, because I did look into that one at one point, because our dining services were asking about it. So I'm like, let me look into it. And it was more about making more money for the producers, or making sure the producers were doing things the best they could do, but it was more about procuring their own pipeline. It was not about helping the farmers. It was about making sure that you guys can continue to produce a lot so that we can continue to buy at the prices that we've negotiated. And it was really kind of sketchy. So how much are they really doing? It's good to have the environmental portion of that, because I'm not sure that all the labels have the environmental portion. And that's part
We
of
have
it.
time for one more question. Send your hand up for a while.
One of the goals you mentioned for Whole Foods Market is the grocery store. You want to maximize profits, create as many grocery stores as you can, and then one of the things Dr. Tedechi talked about was how fair trade or whole trade is, glaring economics inefficient. it's not really maximizing profits. So how does Whole Foods, I guess, balance that as like a corporation trying to, gain as much money as they can while still trying to like give back and I guess.
Well, we are not always about maximizing profit. What we are about is taking care of our stakeholders, and that's our shareholders, our customers, our workers, and our vendors and producers. So we have to balance all of that, and we don't do things the cheap way. At our store, instead, 85% of the trash that we produce is composted or recycled. It costs us more money to do it that way. It would be cheaper to landfill it, but we don't do that because it's not the right thing to do. We start at $10 an hour. We don't have to, that's not the minimum wage, but we don't want to pay anyone less than $10 an hour. So we don't do things to maximize profit. Like, that's not our business model. And we spend more money, like we do all kinds of things that cost money, more money than we would need to, that we could cut costs. If we didn't pay the administrative costs of our foundations, that would save us a ton of money, but that's not the right, we don't think that's the right thing to do. We want 100% of the money that's raised to go to help people. And we have another foundation that funds salad bars and garden grants for schools. And we cover the administrative costs of that. Like, we actually are not about maximizing profit. Profit's really important because we run the business model that we run, and we have our team members empowered, and our team members participate in gain sharing. They get a portion of the profit that their team makes. Every 4 weeks they get a payout if their team is profitable. Like, we motivate our team members to work smart and to be more efficient, and we really believe in team member happiness and excellence. That's one of our core values. And we just have found that we can run a business like this and be one of the more profitable grocery companies in the world. So, and it works for us.
To play devil's advocate, just because that's like what I do, they're gaining customers that way. They are making more money because they're doing that. I mean, because there are people who care, who are going to go and say, I'm going to Whole Foods because I like what they do. And so they are going to be able to expand and make more profit because of that. And so it is, on the business, it's their strategy.
It's our strategy.
Totally makes sense. Even more far-flung is Equal Exchange, which they come right out and say, we are a worker-owned for-profit company, but they're not profit maximizing. They explicitly come out and say, we want our shareholders to get some money back, but if it's too much, it means we're not pouring it back into our farmers. And so they have this ideal level of profit, but they don't want it to get too high because it means they're not doing enough. They also have crazy things with wages that the highest paid can only earn like 4 times what the lowest paid worker is.
We have that too. It's not 4 times.
Oh, yeah, it's 4 times is ridiculous.
14
yeah.
in our
Still,
company.
That's,
But we definitely
it's not the 225
We are
that's
not
more
paying
typical.
ridiculous amounts to our executives either.
Right.
We don't think that's
Right.
the right thing to do. But you can earn a really decent wage at Whole Foods Market, and if you move up into store leadership, you are making 3 figures. It's a really great
come work for
career.
you?
Yes, absolutely. It's a great company to work for. There's a lot of opportunity, and it's really exciting. We actually just started a program with St. Joe's where we are taking a number of your food marketing students, and we're giving them a job. We are training them for 6 months and guaranteeing that if it's a successful, training, things work out well, they're going to become an assistant team leader in a department in our store. That's amazing. And, so that's how bad it is for us. We have 40 positions, associate team leader positions open right now in this region. And we have 42 stores. Like we need people, so we're looking at doing things like that because we need good people to come work at Whole Foods Market. We need people who are interested in growing into leaders.